the somewhat new eco-fantasy genre, Bigfoot, and Ralph Waldo Emerson all have in common. They all occupy the mind and musings of the award-winning and often, shall we say, avant-garde author Mike Robinson. He has written multiple novels and dozens of short stories. Most of them are in the speculative fiction arena, including Skunk Ape Semester, which is on the 2025 to be read list that we put out. There is also Ancient Tides Ashore, Walking the Dusk, which was a semifinalist in the Publishers Weekly's Book Life Prize. His work has appeared in Clark's World, American Gothic Fantasy, Storyteller, Clone Pod, and oodles more. He's received honors from the Writers of the Future, the Next Generation Indie Book Awards, Maxi Awards, the Book Fest. Congrats on that. Plus many others. I can't list them all. He is an editor. He's worked with hundreds of authors. Definitely can't mention all of them. He is the senior editor and wordsmith writing with Wordsmith Writing Coaches. That's a mouthful. He's also co-created the New Author Plunge, which is a workshop for beginning writers, and he is on the advisory board of GLAWS, the Greater Los Angeles Writers Society. He's also an illustrator and the award-winning screenwriter of the film Blood Corral. Mike, my friend, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Desiree. It's great to be here.
I gotta say, in looking over your bio and the materials you sent me, because I've known you, we've known each other for many years now. We won't count them all because it might reveal a little too much about our ages, respectively. But I didn't realize until now that you are an illustrator. I did not know that.
Yeah, it sort of woke up in me, or I guess had a reawakening. So I actually went to school for illustration at Otis College of Art and Design. And I studied drawing and painting and illustration at Santa Monica College before that, and I transferred to Otis. At the time, though, for reasons I won't get into, I was going through some issues in my life, and I really just was driven to write more than I was driven to draw. And so I found myself, this is probably the nerdiest ditch story ever, but I found myself ditching class to go to the library or to go to Barnes and Noble and to read and to write. So I really kind of sidelined the visual art and just threw myself into writing. And I did occasionally illustrate some of the stories that I wrote, but I really didn't pursue illustration or visual art for quite a while. I would do it for personal use, drawing cards for significant others and things like that. But it just sort of reawakened the past couple of years. I've actually had story ideas that center around a more visual space. So once I had an idea, this happens with writing too. Once I have an idea that really just clicks with me, then I just can't not do it. So I threw myself back into it.
Well, that creative part of our brain, I feel like whether you're expressing it through writing or through visual art, and there's all sorts of other ways to do it, but it's all very interconnected. So I think it's fascinating that you started off on that path, sideline to just a different way of expressing, and came back to it. And congrats for coming back to it. Because I think a lot of times sometimes people just kind of say, oh, I once wanted to do this and I never saw it through. So I think that's really cool that you did that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's also been a nice creative break from writing too, because it doesn't come with a lot of the career expectations that I now have for writing that sometimes weigh me down or I'll always be a writer. I'm never not going to write, but no one really is expecting much of me, or I don't expect a ton of myself yet from illustration. And so it's been kind of a nice place to just playfully explore.
Does it help you too?
A nice sandbox, I should say.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Does that help you if you're kind of playing around with illustrating I have to imagine then you're very visual. So you're visual in your writing. Does it help you when you kind of are planning and plotting and making your characters, your settings and scenes, stuff like that come to life?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, growing up in Los Angeles, my blood is half celluloid, or I guess, that's a outdated term now, but because everything's digital. But I have a very movie-like imagination. I'm a cinephile as well. And so that definitely plays into it. And I've always been very visually oriented.
Yeah. Yeah. And
I've
I
always loved,
mentioned
long descriptions and so anyway, yeah.
that's one of the things I love about the writing in all of your books, the ones that I've read, that I've been
Thank you.
fortunate enough to read, is you're very descriptive and immersive, and you feel like you're there. So
that's exactly what I'm hoping to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. And let's start with Skunk Ape Semester. So again, you have so many books, so many short stories that we could discuss, but we're going to focus, I think, on the three that we've mentioned. I want to start with Skunk Ape. Can you tell folks in your own words what's going on in this book?
So the very boiled down elevator pitch would be Jack Kerouac's On the Road, if people remember that book, meets the X-Files, if people remember that show. So basically a road trip through Paranormal Americana. And it's about a zoologist, a zoology professor, who has kind of a quasi-closeted interest in Bigfoot because he encountered, when he was a child in Florida, the skunk ape, which is the regional term for Bigfoot, kind of this very odorous ape that lives in the swamp. And so when he was a child, he encountered this thing, and it's kind of been his, academic or intellectual Moby Dick. He's been, seeking it out in his spare time and trying to figure out just, why it's so elusive and what it is, what its true nature is. And this has expanded a little bit into other realms of cryptozoology, which is the science of hidden animals, Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and other things. And so after a health scare and a little bit of an academic shakeup in his career, he takes a sabbatical and, along with 3 graduates, travels the country and essentially interviews different people who've had experiences, and some of the stories, some of the places and the places he goes and the characters he meets are taken from actual cases, and I just kind of embellish them a little bit, or I add my own creative spin. And it's really an investigation. It's sort of an investigation of, himself, of the stranger places in America, why we're fascinated by these things, what compels us about these things, even in a very science-dominated, 21st century. And it's really, I think for me, it's illustrative of my goal in writing a lot of these squishy speculative stories, that I want the focus to be on the human reaction to the monster and not the monster itself. So it's not a run from Bigfoot, kind of story where it's, Jaws with claws kind of thing. Or they're hiding out in a cabin and being beset by some, scary 9-foot creature. It's a more sober-minded exploration of the phenomenon. And that's what I enjoy. But I also want it to be accessible. Of course, I don't want it to just drone on. So there's a lot of cool action and a couple twists and turns along the way.
When we talk about speculative fiction, and I'm just going to give a little shout out to our friends over at Magic Mind, because one of the things that I enjoy about this product, which I take, and I think everybody knows that by now, is that it does kind of open you up in certain regards. We have the lion's mane mushrooms and the nootropics and lots of vitamins and minerals organically sourced. By the way, I know you're in California, so the mushrooms, for example, are grown organically in California. And that's one of the things I think is so cool. Yeah, is that it helps writers find that, what if this happened? What if that happened? And looking deeper. Because, I love a good slasher flick. I love it when Bigfoot tears their arms off and blood gushes.
Sure.
Who doesn't love that?
Yeah.
But when you talk about kind of bringing in these deeper issues, it really just makes me want to go out into a cabin in the woods with some magic mind and explore that part of my writing, because it really just unpacks something that's so much more than what you see on the surface. So I want to let folks know that they can take the 7-day challenge with Magic Mind if they like. You get the link and everything is below. Just enter BTMY20 at checkout and you can get up to 48% off your first subscription. Or if you want, you can do the 20% off a one-time purchase. That's magicmind.com/BTMY20. The link is below. But let's dig into that whole idea of you've got things going on. We kind of kicked this off with this idea of Ralph Waldo Emerson meets Bigfoot. And you have a lot of that in your writing. Can you talk about that? Why do you like bringing in these kind of polar opposite ideas and mashing them together?
Well, so I'll give just a quick digest of my reading history. So when I was very young, I just devoured scary stories, R.L. Stine and the occasional Mark Twain. But I also devoured Gary Paulson stories, Hatchet and a few others that The River. And he was very nature centric and celebrated nature and the great outdoors and everything. And so and I've always loved that, despite growing up in Los Angeles. And I've always been fascinated by, the dark side of things, monsters under the bed and what have you. And as I grew, I kind of detoured in high school from my reading and writing a little bit, as one maybe does when they're just sort of drifting through adolescence. But when I got back to reading, I started rereading a lot of Stephen King and what have you. And I kind of avoided the classics and, more literary fare. And then at one point, I kind of realized that I was just sort of swimming laps in my pool and there was a whole ocean to explore. And so I just dove in and started reading Dostoevsky and Joyce and Emerson and some of these other guys that I hadn't touched with a 10-foot pole. And I loved it. And so my goal has been kind of to marry the deeper, more intellectual inquiry, literary side with the fun, more kind of, I don't want to say pulpy, but I guess more commercially minded fiction side. And so taking the benefits of both and the stylistic and narrative tendencies of both and just trying to weave together something new. And I've always loved Emerson. I realized that I was sort of influenced by his thinking even before I'd read him. I mean, he has this concept of the oversoul, kind of this Joseph Campbell-like, spiritual wellspring, this sense of unity that we all share. We all kind of take from the same well, as it were, in our thoughts and ideas and our dreams. And so that has always, as someone who kind of considers himself a pantheist, which is kind of a more spiritual take on nature being God and God being nature. That's always very, very much resonated with me. And that kind of came out organically. And once I started reading Emerson, I think it just kind of came out even more so. And I started to explore those ideas. And I really love exploring those ideas in the context of more accessible kind of, I guess, literary commercial fiction or commercial literary fiction, however you want to say it. Taking big ideas and big concepts, big, sci-fi or horror or weird Lovecraftian concepts and wrapping them around, again, more, I guess, idealistic or transcendental modes. And that's always been kind of a space that I like to occupy.
I like that space. It's a good space. I often wonder, because you mentioned Dostoevsky and Emerson and so many others, like even a lot of Russian literature, Tolstoy, etc. I almost feel, because I majored in English and I read them because I was forced to read them. And I was like, oh my God. And we're trying to unpack these high level things. And just in the context of it being academic and being tested on it and being forced to write. And forced to write an essay is so much different than creative writing, right?
Absolutely.
I almost wonder if we should just, as adults, once we get to our mid 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whenever, just go back to them, even if you hated them in high school or college, because I think to your point, you do have a different perspective when you go back to them, and they can influence and help your creativity in so many
I
ways.
absolutely agree. I think too that this adds a layer of diligence to the exercise maybe, but what I like to do is just read a little bit more about the given author or the given title and see where it might affect me or where it might resonate with me. So if I do a little bit of homework beforehand, I see what the book is about. I see what the author's about. And I get a deeper appreciation of why this book, will be valuable in some way or why I should pursue reading it. That tends to help as opposed to just kind of going off cultural conditioning. Well, this is a big, important book and I should just read it. But, you really want to read. There's a reason that a lot of these books are classics and or well regarded is because they have spoken to a lot of people, but they won't speak to everyone. So you just have to find out if they'll speak to you, and sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But I'm of the belief too that you can always, even if they don't necessarily speak to you, I think there's value in seeing what they've brought to the table in terms of advancing the human story and the human condition.
Let's talk about Walking the Dusk. I think this is a good place to segue. Can you tell us about this book?
So this one, again, began kind of like I guess it was inspired by, I guess you could say, sort of a marriage of The Exorcist and Faust. So the original idea was a physicist who, again, scientist, but I swear not all my protagonists are scientists. A physicist who is visited by a demon who tells him that, hey, I can show you I can give you all the answers to the deeper questions of existence, but I'm going to have to possess you. And so it's kind of this back and forth. And, he gets all his answers, but how much of his soul does he lose and whatnot? And so that was the initial idea, but then it grew into kind of a Dante-like quest and this dual narrative of when he's young and when he's older, kind of sort of like Stephen King's It, split between the child story and the adult story. And when he's a young kid of about 9, his older sister of about 14 was beset by a strange, malevolent, otherworldly force. And he was tasked essentially with trekking what I call the outer spheres of existence, kind of a Dante-like voyage into essentially the afterlife to rescue bits and pieces of his sister's spirit, so her memories and things, and then just reconstitute them. And so that's kind of the child narrative. And then the adult narrative is when he's taken refuge in science and in physics. He's a well-regarded physics professor, and he's kind of forgotten a lot of what happened when he was a child on the other side of our material realm here. But then that strange, malevolent force comes back into his life and comes back into his sister's life when he's in his 40s. And so then he has to kind of like crack open the shell of all his adult thinking and go back into the mode of a child, or the mode that he was when he was a child, and try and save her one last time.
I know you like hiking and nature, as you mentioned, and I do want to talk about the concept of eco-fantasy. But first, I got to ask you, Mike. So we've got cryptids, we've got Bigfoot, we've got this existential big questions, Dante's Inferno. Have you yourself ever encountered anything otherworldly that would give you pause?
I have, yes. So I'd always wanted to. And then just because I'm that curious, but I never, and I was always kind of giving the benefit of the doubt to the more, I guess, authentic sounding testimonies of people who had experienced the supernatural, but I never really, every time something weird happened to me, like my Western trained brain would just go into overdrive trying to, uh, apply logic to it, and usually wouldn't pass the smell test. But when I was with an ex of mine, she was very sensitive. And I mean that psychically, very psychically sensitive. And things would happen around her that I just could not explain. I mean, doors would close on their own, and no, there was no wind, there was nothing going on. Things would just kind of appear out of nowhere. I was walking out of a room at one point, and I heard a clatter, and I just looked behind me, and there's this cup that I've never seen on the floor right behind me, and it was dirty, like it'd been in the walls. It wasn't a cup that I owned. And a few other things, like I was writing one time, and I had a I had a pen and a pen cap, and I took the cap off and I put it next to me, and I finished writing, and I looked to put the pen cap back on. I'm like, well, that's weird. Where'd it go? And I'm looking all around. It must have fallen off on the couch or something. Oh, well, that's weird. And then I'm undressing later that night, and I take off my sock, and the pen cap's in my sock. Like some little miscreant sprite or something. It was very, very strange. Yeah. But since we're no longer together, that stuff doesn't really happen around me. So yeah, some people maybe are just magnets for it. But I know that's kind of small beans compared to what other people have experienced, but it was very strange.
That's interesting, though, because it seems like it was centered around your ex, and right. as if she's pulling her, it's being drawn to her, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes those really mundane things, they are so easy to write off. Somehow this pen cap fell into my sock that's right up against my flesh, and I didn't feel it. We would explain that away. But it's interesting how when you're around somebody who kind of opens you up to that way of thinking, that's when it starts to happen.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, it was weird, and there definitely was a pattern of, this thing just playing minor pranks. I mean, things of my roommates at the time as well would go missing and wind up in strange places, like, his, like a box of chocolates of his that he kept in the pantry would suddenly be under his sink in the bathroom. Stuff like that. So, I mean, maybe one of us sleepwalked it there, but neither of us ever, slept walked as far as I know. So I don't know why we do that necessarily. So yeah, but it was weird.
Almost just enough. So it's like, okay, whatever this thing is, it's being mischievous. Because if it could, if it wanted to, it could manifest in such a way where we'd be like, holy cow. But it's not. It's just kind of niggling at you a little bit, making you wonder.
Yeah, exactly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of what I try to do in stories too.
Mm-hmm. And you're a very good niggler. Yes. Okay. You do it oh so well.
That's good.
Let's segue into eco-fantasy. First of all, okay, I want to talk about Ancient Tides Ashore, but let's take a step back and talk about this as a genre. Sometimes new genres kind of pop up because this is what's happening. It's the zeitgeist or whatever you want to call it. Right. It just hits home right now. So what do you think of the new genre, eco-fantasy as a whole? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
So to me, it's kind of what I've always tried to do, and what I've mentioned. It's marrying my love of and celebration of nature with the fantastical and the supernatural. And I think obviously those have to be kind of one at some point. They're part of the same continuum. If we're all part of this same, universe, again, the kind of Emerson transcendental unity that I was talking about. But I think putting the material world and the natural world in stark relief against the supernatural world just enhances it narratively. I just love that. And this particular book, Ancient Tides Ashore, deals with not so much cryptids, but what we would call fae, and the more elemental beings that exist in beside us in nature, and that are sort of the more or less the breath of life, as it were, that exists all around us, that we can kind of feel but not really see, at least not a lot of us. And the main character is sensitive to them, and she's not really inspired by my ex, but there's bits of her that are there. And again, it's sort of a dual narrative. It takes place on Kauai, the Hawaiian island, and it follows the first wave of Polynesians to discover the island, and one Polynesian in particular who is sensitive himself to these creatures. And then it has a contemporary thread of this woman who grows up Mormon, and she's very religious, and life kind of pounced on her when she was young, and she got married and had a lot of kids in her 20s. But she's never really felt like she could explore what really makes her tick, and what and some of her talents, which include this kind of secret sensitivity that she shares with this ancient Polynesian. And so then she finds herself on Kauai, and there's a ecological disaster happening or about to happen. And she kind of senses it beforehand. And through their shared connection across time, she and this Polynesian character work to try and figure out what elemental creature is behind this ecological disaster.
I love it. Okay. And I was actually just in the island of Kauai.
Oh, nice.
Kauai Writers Conference. Yeah. We'll be back again next November. And we did the helicopter flyover. We saw the whole island, and it's breathtaking.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things that one of the local women was explaining to me is how, because it's volcanic, it's the volcano's right there. It has its own ecosystem. It has like just so much going on. And she explained it, well, this is the womb of the world. And when she said that, Mike, it was like I got shivers, because you talk about Polynesians and just the magic that is in that, on that island. It really is. It's palpable. It's like you feel it.
I love it too. Yeah, I love Hawaii. I've been going there since I was 10, and I never really, I mean, there's dozens and dozens and thousands of stories about Hawaii, but I never really seen a fantasy about Hawaii, especially not one that dealt with this strain of fantasy and this strain of folklore and cultural lore and things like that. And so that sort of fascinated me. And I like the idea of again, human unity, like bringing together cultures that have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with one another. I mean, you're talking about 6th century Polynesia versus, 20th and 21st century Mormon upbringing. So in the United States, but still finding some kind of kinship across time and across spirituality and across experience.
Yeah. And there you go again, just taking two opposites and mashing them together in such sublime, beautiful ways. I'm curious, Mike. So you've got the books that we've talked about. Dream Shores keeps coming to mind, even though we didn't bring that up as part of the ones that we're going to talk about. But that's another one where it just has this ethereal quality. And you mentioned Stephen King, and I'm curious, is there a Mike Robinson universe in the way that Stephen King's books and short stories are all set in like the same universe? Is that the same of your books?
That's definitely the case. Yeah. And it was, I would say, half organic and half not. I mean, I like referencing my other characters and stories in whatever I'm writing at the moment. And so that's always fun to do. But I realized too that I was kind of unwittingly creating the rules of this universe as I went from book to book, story to story. And so all the logic and all the rules that underpin the supernatural phenomena and the ethereal phenomena that you find in a lot of my books are very compatible. And I didn't really do that by design. I think it's just how my brain works, and the stuff that I'm fascinated by just tends to, they all tend to flock together, these ideas. And they're different enough that they're, obviously very distinct. and how they're presented, but their underlying fascinations and their ideas are pretty. There's a lot of kinship there, so I think that they work well together. And so I've kind of fleshed that out as I've gone. I realized I recognize these connections, and I've kind of doubled down on them a little bit more. So it started off organic, and now it's kind of by design.
And you can definitely tell when reading your books too. That's one of the things that I've noticed about them over time, is it does have that connection, like you said. We're running up against the clock, but I did want to ask you really quick, because you work with authors, especially new writers. You help them in so many ways, editing, etc. Any tips or advice that you want to give to somebody who's thinking about putting the pen to paper for the first time?
I would say, I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it, but I would say you just have to, don't wait for any kind of permission slip. I mean, if it will make you feel better to take a class or to go to a seminar or to go to a conference, sure. But really the tools you need are essentially the pen and the written word. So read omnivorously. I see a lot of authors who don't really give reading the respect that it deserves for how important it is to writing a good story. I mean, they read when they were a kid, but now they mostly doom scroll or watch TV or whatever. And like they read maybe a book a year. And I'm like, you got to read more than that. And you have to read outside your comfort zone. You can't just read the same author over and over. It's fine to have favorites, but in order to really make your voice distinct and to really bring in all the ideas and instruments that are needed to, I think, heighten your potential as an author and to give yourself the most distinct brand that you can. And to also just give you ideas too. I mean, you might read something and something might spark and connect with something in your life. And you're like, oh, wow, that'd be really cool. And I never would have thought of that if I hadn't read this, X author or this X book. And so that's really important, but also just diving in and doing it. Once you feel, and I think that's what reading helps too. Like once you kind of equip yourself with multiple different ways of stylistic approaches and voices and narrative techniques, then you could just kind of dive in and play around and see what happens. And, as Ray Bradbury said, vomit it up in the morning and clean it up in the afternoon. So just, upchuck it, and then it doesn't have to be perfect. It's never perfect. I'll write a paragraph today and then, that's pretty good. And then like a week later, I'll trim it back to like one sentence. And I'm like, I didn't really need all that other stuff. So nothing is perfect out of the gate. So you just got to keep going.
Yep. Dash those darlings against the rocks and kill them. Them out of the way. You don't need them.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent. Can you let people know where they can go to find you online? Give us your website and where they can find your books and find more information about any of the organizations and writing groups that you're with. So,
I'm a book coach with Wordsmith Writing Coaches. So wordsmithwritingcoaches.com. Last year we had the first new authors plunge, which is an online course specifically for new or aspiring authors who want to hone their craft, or, you could have a first draft ready, or you could just have an idea. And so it's really just kind of geared toward, it's an 8-week course and it's once a week. And we basically prepare you in all the different disciplines that go into authorship, and we end it with promotion and publication and all the hurdles therein, and the lay of the land there. But I'm there, and you can find my work at mike-robinsonauthor.com. I'm also on Amazon, of course. There's an Amazon page. You can find it on my website. You can also, on my website, sign up for my monthly newsletter, Weird Wondrous Right Life. So where I chronicle, stories out of the paranormal and the supernatural, and just something or just odd news. And then Wondrous, I usually delve into, some cool bit of natural science or an archaeological discovery or a cosmic discovery. And then Right Life is usually what's going on with me or friends of mine, fellow authors, every once in a while I do an interview with someone. And so that's and I swear it's not a long newsletter. It's nice and punchy. It's fun. It's full of links. And
Right.
so, yeah, you could sign up for it on the front page of my website.
Fantastic. Mike Robinson, thank you so much for joining us today on the Books That
Thank you,
Make You
Desiree.
Show.
Yeah.
You bet.
Yeah,
You
it was
bet.
great.
And thank you, everybody, for joining us as well. A big shout out to our friends over at Magic Mind. Don't forget, you can do the 7-day challenge. You can go to the website, use our link. It's BTMY20 at checkout. The link is in the description as well, magicmind.com/BTMY. Magic Mind has all sorts of nootropics, and it's third-party tested, natural ingredients, a lot of organic ingredients. So check out that 7-day challenge if you want to give it a shot. And you can save at checkout. You can get up to 48% off your first subscription or 20% off of a one-time purchase. Also, don't forget to check us out on our website. It is booksthatmakeyou.com, where you can find wonderful interviews with authors like Mike, as well as giveaways and lots of fun. We also have our Webby award-winning newsletter that you can sign up for, and follow us on our social media. That is on Facebook and on YouTube, of course, Instagram. I think we're still on TikTok, if TikTok is still a thing. Sometimes it's hard to tell in the world nowadays, but you know where to find us. Until next time, all of my bookish buddies, please enjoy all of the books that make you exactly who you are.
Books make you hope. Books make you dream. Books make you laugh. Books make you scream. This is the Books That Make You show, discussing books with authors and experts, unraveling the inner pages of all the books that help make us who we are.